Well, welcome back, everybody, from a cloudy Cape Town. This is where the budget is going to be announced later on this afternoon, 2 o'clock exactly, by Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana. And these are just some of the aerial shots that we've got for you in the visuals of Cape Town. We tried to open up on the top of Table Mountain just to give you a beautiful view. We didn't manage to get that view because that cloud cover is densely covering the city. But that doesn't really matter, because I'll tell you what, it's one of these budgets where the clouds seem to be lifting on the South African economy. Well, that's what, if we look at the numbers, that's what it's telling us. And there's some very, very good points in terms of what we can look at. Inflation is relatively contained. Interest rate environments are stabilizing. There's a stronger rand out there. Commodity prices are booming. And this is a wonderful way for the finance minister to stand up there and brag about things. And I think what he will brag about as well is the fact that the lights are on, because that's something we've been grappling with for a while. But however, we've switched the lights back on and switch the water off. And that's a very big problem he's going to have to figure out, to find the money to repair all of that. And, you know, there are geopolitical tensions, there's exchange rate volatility, and of course, there's that foot and mouth disease outbreak. So as you can see, there's a lot we need to cover. But I've got my guest here, Mpho, who is from Alex Forbes. She's the chief economist at Alex Forbes, and we're hoping to unpack some of this with her. And Mpho Molopiane, it's a pleasure to have you. I'm going to jump straight into it. I had asked you a bit earlier to talk from the household point of view. South Africans, I'm not sure we are feeling relief, even though I spoke to some of those good things that the economy is showing.
Yeah, I know, and I think that, speaks to a host of factors. If we look at, I was mentioning that personal income tax brackets have not necessarily been adjusted for inflation for quite several years. So that speaks to an increasing tax burden. But if you also think about wage increases, they've also been quite muted, lagged inflationary pressures. And in addition to that, we also have increasing fuel levies. We had the fuel levy increasing last year as well. And, there's anticipation that this year it may increase again. The unemployment rate, it has decreased in recent quarters, but it remains excessively high, and that just speaks to the circumstances that households continue to face in the country.
And it's tough. I mean, if we look at the food basket, and I'm looking at just an average of 5,400 rand a month, inflation, as you mentioned, sitting at 3.5%. There appears to be a disconnect between macro stability and lived reality, and we can't deny it when the facts are sitting in front of us.
No, we certainly can't deny it. So, I think it's also important for us to understand CPI inflation, right? It's a basket of goods, but there's also services in there. So while inflation is sitting around 3.5%, we heard, for instance, with the latest release that meat inflation is, excessively high in the 15% level. So that shows you that within that CPI basket, there are things that, you don't necessarily buy on a day-to-day, and they're in deflation. If you're thinking about furniture, if you think about imported clothing, that is in deflation territory. But other things remain excessively expensive. And one thing we also tend to forget with inflation, right, is that it's an annual increase in prices.
Yeah.
So, just because inflation is 3.5, it does not mean that prices have decreased over the years. They have continued to increase on top of, higher inflation in past years.
Yeah. Tell me about it, because you see these prices going up, you never see them coming down. And that's what we all complain about. Another thing, perhaps maybe we can celebrate this, but you help me celebrate this, and we're focusing quite a bit on the consumer here, is of course the minimum wage, which has risen to 30 rand and 23 cents an hour. Well, it's going to in March. That's what's been said here. I mean, does this meaningfully improve the purchasing power? I mean, 30 rand and 23 cents an hour? I don't know. You help me understand whether that's going to make an impact.
I mean, in South Africa, where we have such high inequality, the reality is that, yes, it goes a long way. I think it is better than nothing for most households, but it's not sufficient. I mean, if you just think about an average middle income or high income family, how much are they spending on food? They're spending just on food over 5,000. And when you compare that to the minimum wage, where that has to be stretched for food, it has to be stretched for transportation, it has to be stretched for, kids' uniform, and just, winter clothing as well. It still feels little, but we are saying that it it's better than nothing if you think about it.
I suppose it is, but when you talk about that, but then we also look at an unemployment rate that's sitting above 42%. And this is a great worry and a huge concern, because unless that economy grows, we're not going to see that unemployment rate get better. And I suppose the question is, can fiscal discipline alone improve household well-being?
I think it can. It is a necessary but not a sufficient condition. So in a sense that we can't continue increasing debt, and that debt just goes towards servicing debt, or it goes towards reoccurring expenditure. What I am encouraged about with last year's budget, and I hope that will continue in this budget, is that the minister has talked about the reorganization of government expenditure. So they're focusing more on infrastructure investment. Now that has a much higher impact in terms of improving growth outcomes, rather than it going towards recurrent expenditure like wages or goods and services, right? So the fact that we have more expenditure now going towards infrastructure spending, that will be important for lifting growth. But for growth to make a meaningful impact on the high unemployment level, we need to be growing at about 2.5% to 3%. And we're not hearing those estimates yet. At best, we're still talking about 2% growth by 2028.
And that's when there are grants, and we've got a very heavily dependent population on grants. I mean, we see the SRD grant has effectively become semi-permanent. Is this sustainable? I mean, let's talk about this in terms of, is this effective economically?
I don't think the SRD grant is sustainable. Initially, when we talked about the COVID grant, was that it was supposed to be a temporary relief measure. And the problem is that you also don't want to create a social system where young people are reliant on grants rather than, looking for employment opportunities. Now, you say that it is semi-permanent, but the president in his SONA actually said that they are looking to make it permanent. But in, previous discussions with National Treasury officials, their thinking was that actually, instead of making this a social grant, how about we convert it and link it to employment outcomes, support graduates that are looking for job opportunities, because, it's expensive to look for a job, right? You need internet connectivity, you need to be printing CVs and emailing them. You also need proper clothing to be able to show up correctly for those interviews, right? So the thinking with National Treasury officials is, how do we transform this such that it encourages going out to get employment rather than it encouraging being reliant on the state.
All right, Mpho, thank you. Thank you for giving us a couple of views. I didn't even get to speak to you about what you specialize in, and of course that's retirement and savings. That's Alex Ford. But I think we'll pull the puzzle together as the broadcast goes ahead. But thank you so much. Thank you very much for joining us. Mpho Molopiane, she's the chief economist from Alex Ford.